Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 1 of our story. If you like this What If story and want to see part 2, let me know in the comments below. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Also, check the description for more great content and my playlist. This story was posted by 𝐻𝐼 on Wattpad. Now let's start. This night was the same as most others, a few muggings, a drunk dude here or there, and a few 𝐬𝐶𝐿 assault cases for him to stop. Rabbit crouched, perched on the edge of a 6-story building, looking over the city. His patrol was almost over, and Rabbit just wanted to get to his job and grab a coffee. Of course, he never gets what he wants. His sensitive ears pick up a distinct sound of screaming, and his legs shot him off in the direction of the sound. Years of saving people most every night allowed him to develop a keen ear and fast reflexes. Reaching the scene, he peeked over the edge of the building. Below, Rabbit saw 2 girls, around high school in age, cowering under 3 intimidating men. The smallest of the 3 had an obvious quirk. 2 medium wings stuck out through his shirt, black with thin gray webbing that matched his scruffy hair. Probably a bat-related quirk, Rabbit mused. The second of the 3 had no obvious quirk, just dark brown spiky hair and caramel eyes, plain as can be, so the Vigilante would need to figure that one out as they fought. The last man, who was obviously the leader in this situation, was smiling and ranting out about how much money they could get by selling the terrified girls off while his lackeys started to tie them up. As one of the girls let out another wail in fear, the man turned his arm into some kind of sword threateningly, quieting her. Rabbit had seen enough to plan his easy win. He landed in the shadows behind the group silently, no one noticing his presence. The second lackey was trouble since his quirk was an emitter type that Rabbit didn't know of yet, and the leader would be hard to fight while having backup, so he would have to take out the bat guy before facing him. Smirking, Rabbit rushed forward, pushing the plain lackey's pressure points immediately to make him drop. "Mind if I step in?" Rabbit taunted, voice distorted and electronic. Their shock quickly turned to anger, and the bat dude lunged at Rabbit while the leader moved to grab the girls. "Wow, not even going to help your friend that I knocked out." The fight ended as soon as it had started. Leathery bat wings sliced towards Rabbit, aiming right for his temple. Had the hit landed, he would have been stunned with a splitting headache, but to Rabbit, the move was way too predictable. He caught the wing with both hands and managed to flip the criminal over his shoulder and into the ground with a loud crack. With the lackey in a daze, and probably with a concussion, Rabbit turned to the leader who was about to pick up the terrified girls. You should have just run. Not that it'll make a difference." Rabbit shrugged as the man whipped around to face the Vigilante. Sneering, the man rushed at him, both arms shifted into sharp spikes. The criminal began to stab and slice haphazardly while Rabbit lazily dodged. Sure, he could have fun playing with the man, but he was tired and wanted to free the victims as soon as he could. After a few seconds, Rabbit ducked and shot the palm of his hand straight into the guy's jaw. With a startled grunt, he fell backwards, right on top of the now passed-out bat guy. Rabbit rushed over to the girls who were looking at him with wide and hopeful eyes. With a flick of his wrist, a knife appeared in his hand as he began to cut the ropes. "Call the police," he told them softly. Once the rope was off, the 2 began to thank him profusely for his help, pausing only to call the police as he told them to. He simply nodded and moved to zip-tie the criminal's wrists. Satisfied that the girls would be fine, he scaled a building and headed home to change before work. Izuku slid into the café silently. It was currently 4:30 a.m. and the café was to open at 5 a.m. He usually arrived a bit early so that he could make himself some coffee before preparing the place for opening. Yui, his manager, probably wasn't even awake yet. Izuku noticed how she began to rely on him in the mornings ever since he was hired a year ago and asked for the earliest shift times. Not that he minded really, being alone in the small cafe with coffee and silence was one of his favorite times of his day. Finishing up his cup, Izuku saw there was 20 minutes left until opening. After cleaning up his mug, he went out the back and upstairs to Yui's apartment. She wouldn't be awake, so Izuku lifted one of her small plants and pried the key out from its hidden wedge underneath. He opened the door slowly and was met with silence. Peeking into the bedroom, he saw Yui sprawled out on her bed, sheets rumpled and half on the floor. With a sigh, he moved to her bed and shook her awake. After getting a muffled and tired groan of confirmation, Izuku smiled. "Come on, sleepyhead, we open in 20 minutes. All he got in response was a muffled, "Okay, I'm up," and a lazy arm waving him off. Snorting, he moved to leave, calling on his way out, "I'll have some coffee ready for you when you come down." Another muffled noise of thanks made him smile. Yui was a young woman in her late 20s who decided to open a coffee shop after high school because she loved coffee, her own words. At first, she ran it alone, but started hiring after her place got more popular. Izuku was lucky she had even accepted his hire. Apparently, she had needed a good baker, and Izuku had also impressed her with his coffee despite being only 11 at the time. If anyone asked, she would claim that he was her cousin, which was a huge relief to Izuku. Yui never pushed him to question why he was working at such a young age and super early in the morning at that. All he had told her was that he had finished high school education and needed money, which seemed to convive her. Izuku checked his watch as it ticked to 5 o'clock and flipped the door sign to open. Yui came out of the back a moment later, greeting Izuku with a quick hug and warm smile. Despite it not being the truth, he really did think of her as an aunt. "Remind me again why I thought it was a good idea to open a coffee shop instead of going to college for a normal job," she asked, yawning and stretching. Izuku shrugged. "You liked coffee and sweets," she scoffed and gave him a playful shove. "I hate that I can't deny that. At least it beats an office job." She barked out a laugh, defiantly. He left her to start up the register system while Izuku checked on his pastries in the back. Every morning he made croissants, pumpkin bread, scones, and muffins. Over the past year, his skills had apparently improved, and Yui would tell him that he could never quit. Everything was looking and smelling delicious so far, and Yui had come over asking for a blueberry muffin, which he happily supplied. She smiled as she ate, informing him of some news like deliveries this week and their other co-workers' schedules. Izuku never saw them much. Sasaki was a college student who worked after Izuku left in the afternoon, only seeing him in passing, and the other was a high school girl that worked only a few days after school when Sasaki didn't. But Izuku didn't need friends. Yui was enough chaos for him. As he was finishing up his baked good and prepped them for display, he heard the front doorbell chime as someone walked in. "I'll be right with you," he called, leaving the pastries behind for now. Walking out from the back, Izuku had to hold himself back from both freaking out and fanboying because standing before him was his idol and the one who had saved his life. Eraserhead Aizawa POV. It had been a long night of work and Aizawa was tired and ready for some coffee and sleep. He checked the time after stopping another mugging and was waiting for the police. It was 5 a.m. and he wanted his coffee. Luckily there was a place not too far, and on his way home, that he has been meaning to try out for a while now. It was small hidden gem he heard about online called Clover. The multiple 5-star reviews said it had some of the best coffee, and right now, Aizawa needed some. As soon as he was let off, he headed over to the cafe. He had scouted it out earlier that night and knew exactly where to go. He spotted the soft, warm light of the cafe and smiled inwardly. Hopefully it was as good as people say it is. When the hero walked in, the little shop was empty except for the sound of shuffling and a young voice calling out, "I'll be right with you." A kid, defiantly not a teen yet, came out from the back with a kind smile. He was short, just under 5 feet, with a mass of curly black hair and 2 bright emerald eyes. Something about him felt familiar, but the hero brushed it off. He saw a lot of people in a day and he was tired. The kid froze a moment, excitement flashing through his eyes before he moved forward again towards the hero. "Good morning. What can I get for you today?" I'll have a black coffee, as dark as you can make it." The kid's smile widened. "Would you like anything to eat? We just finished some fresh muffins and scones." He shrugged. "I'll take a muffin then, I guess." "All right, is that all? And will you be dining in or dash?" A nod of confirmation to both. "All right, your total is 753 yen. Aizawa paid and went to take a seat in a small booth. The cafe was really nice and peaceful. One of the walls was exposed brick with fake vines lining it that spread to the other walls, which were decorated with different artwork, several of which were of cats. Aizawa approved of this choice and took a deep breath. The air was filled with the scent of coffee and a bit of sweets, completing the small coffee shop aesthetic. While Izuku was admiring one of the cat paintings, the kid came out with a steaming mug and small plate with a blueberry muffin on it. He gave a grunt of thanks and sipped the holy liquid he practically lived off of. The hero's eye widened in shock. He thought, "This is the best coffee I have ever had." With a sigh of content, he drank his coffee and finished his muffin, which was also heavenly. He wanted another cup, but before he could ask, the kid walked out with the pot of coffee. "It's as if you read my mind, kid." "No problem, I made plenty." Izuku couldn't help but raise an eyebrow at that. This perfect coffee was made by a kid. This short, still wet behind the ears child made this. He couldn't believe it. "You made this?" The kid gave a small laugh while refilling his mug. "Yes, I did. I get asked that a lot." "Did you also make the muffin?" The kid nodded. "I show up a bit before opening to bake the pastries and make myself a cup as well." Izuku hummed in response, watching the kid pick up his empty plate and walking away. Before he went into the back, Izuku called out to him. "What's your name, kid?" "Oh, I'm Megumi Izuku." It was a Monday, so Izuku left the cafe at 2 p.m. and headed back home. He really wished he was old enough to ride his motorcycle that he had found and fixed up a few months ago, but apparently a 12-year-old kid can't get a license for one even though he can pass the test easily. He sometimes rides it at night when he wants to patrol a further away district or when he has a holiday off of work and can ride it in the morning, but even then, he has to be careful not to get pulled over and questioned. It wasn't too far of a walk home from work, so he didn't mind, but his cabin was hidden just inside of a nearby forest, and he couldn't make a trail leading to his home, which meant a walk through the grass. Usually it was solid, but rainy seasons could get muddy and cleaning his shoes every time he got home or out of the forest was not fun. Sighing, Izuku opened his door and made a beeline to his bedroom. He didn't sleep for 2 days and was starting to feel it despite the coffee in his system fighting it off. Even the holy liquid had its limits apparently. Sighing, he closed his eyes after making sure his alarm was set, and he fell into a dreamless sleep. Beep, beep, beep. Izuku quickly turned off his alarm and pulled himself up, stretching. A few satisfying pops in his back later, and he was ready for his night to begin. It was 8 p.m., and Izuku couldn't go out as Rabbit yet, it was too early. Instead, he spent this time either hacking or working on his support gear. His gear was doing fine, so hacking it was. There were a ton of corrupt companies and criminal activity for him to look into. He sometimes dealt with smaller cases himself as Rabbit, but larger groups and companies require the police and more personnel. Before he knew it, the clock read that it was just past 10 p.m. and Izuku could head out for his nightly patrol. In those 2 hours, he had gathered enough evidence to bring down a medium insurance company as well as some analyses of several criminals/villains that had shown up recently. Izuku quickly copied everything to a cheap flash drive and got geared up. His costume was complex and completely made by himself, which made he secretly proud every time he put it on. He wore thick dark gray leggings with straps on his thighs for some knives and his RBB bullet gun. For shoes, he had long black socks that went over his knees, connecting to the Kevlar sewn into his legging at the knees. Over that, he had sturdy and modified combat boots where he had added a lot of shock absorption to the bottom and a hidden knife that would poke out of the front and back with 2 taps of a button on his gloves. His top consisted of a thin black athletic turtleneck worn under a dark, faded red t-shirt that had a small logo of an R drawn on by Izuku's Vigilante logo with holsters and straps on his arms/shoulders as well as a utility belt on his waist for flash bombs, first aid, and the like. Thick black gloves went halfway up his forearm, his index and middle finger uncovered while the other 3 are fully covered in the heavy material. On top of all that was a dark green-black jacket with a unique bunny-eared hood. They didn't stand up, but rather flopped to the side of his head. He had sewn them on himself. His mask was his favorite part to make. It consisted of 2 main elements. The first piece was a simple black mask that went over his nose and mouth. It had a built-in gas filter as well as a small voice distorter. The mask is just black with a small bunny nose. Painted on his other piece was a red-tinted visor that attached to his hood so that neither could be taken off very easily, especially not in a fight or chase. It required a small pattern type of passcode to remove. He had recently upgraded his visor, which now allowed him to scroll through information and click a SW connected to the mask over his mouth so he could mumble notes that were recorded for later without anyone on the outside hearing him. He has a few weapons, his main one being a bow staff that can split into 2 pieces. He wears it on his back in 2 separate pieces and usually fights with one in both his hands separately depending on the opponent. He also uses knives and a gun with RBB bullets. The knives were originally for insurance so that he could still fight if he lost his bow staff or if he ended up cornered, as well as to cut rope or other materials in general. The gun was for the similar reason that if he couldn't get in close for the fight or if they tried to run, he could hit the opponent from a distance. He mainly uses flash and smoke bombs in larger fights or when he needs to regroup. Glitter bombs are reserved for the police and heroes unless he finds himself in trouble with no other choice, but that only happened once. Villains and criminals didn't deserve his precious glitter. Izuku checked himself over once more before grabbing the flash drive of information and heading out for the night. He headed to the police station and slipped into the one and only Detective 𝐬𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫's office. It was empty, so Izuku just placed it down on the desk with a sticky note attached to it with his signature. Satisfied, Rabbit set out to stop some crime. "Kid, I need you to answer me why." "What was that?" "I didn't cry, I didn't care, kid." Izuku was normally able to keep himself out of his thoughts, but after seeing Eraserhead the other morning, memories began to resurface involuntarily. The night Eraser saved Izuku wasn't one he was too keen on remembering. With a sigh, he laid his back on the rooftop, legs swinging over the edge of the 15-story building. Was it dangerous? Did he care? Not really. Being up high was strangely relaxing and Izuku could easily look down at the city below. But tonight he just wasn't in the right mind. And that could be dangerous. Both for himself and anyone he was trying to save, but mainly for himself. He had already fought off several criminals, coming out with way too many wounds for the level of his opponents. Sure, he had defeated and captured them, but he wasn't as careful or aware as usual. And that could end up with him gravely injured. Just an hour ago, he had let a guy shallowly stab him in the leg just because he didn't feel like fighting him any longer. In fact, he moved towards the knife just to knock the guy out quicker, even though he could have easily done so with a few extra moves. Luckily, no stitches were needed, it was a somewhat dull and short blade, plus the guy wasn't actually expecting to land a hit, so he had dropped the handle immediately. Sighing once more, he checked the time. 2:30 a.m. He decided to head home and shower before he went to work at the cafe. Maybe Eraser will come back today as well, he thought. Even though he hated the memories that came with the hero, Eraser himself was the man Izuku trusted and looked up to, a true hero unlike some golden beach and flaming trash can. Izuku was not disappointed. The underground hero came in soon after opening, asking for his coffee and another muffin. With a bright smile, Izuku served the hero, who gave a grateful look. While it may be dumb to get along with a pro hero, especially one he would run into as Rabbit, Izuku couldn't help it. Eraser didn't recognize him after all these years, but that was fine with Izuku. He could silently pay back the man's kindness with loads of coffee and, unexpectedly, pastries. A year quickly passed by. Izuku had just turned 13 a little over a month ago. At this point, he didn't celebrate. All that the day meant to him now was another year alive. Unfortunately, Yui had overheard him mention it and begged him to make a cake that he ended up taking home afterwards. Surprisingly, Eraserhead took a piece to go when offered, though Izuku knew it was probably for his husband, President Mike, who apparently loves sweets. Don't get him wrong, Izuku did love sweets, but he also was a vigilante who needed to keep fit and healthy, so he tried to lay off desserts and candies when he could. Today, though, was an ordinary day, besides the appearance of a certain lilac-haired boy. He has been showing up on Saturdays around 9 a.m. for the past 2 weeks, making this his 3rd visit. Izuku hadn't gotten a name yet and had been mentally calling him 𝐻𝐻𝐿 because he reminded Izuku of his favorite sleep-deprived hero. The deep eye bags and bored, monotone voice was so similar that Izuku had almost looked up the hero and kid's records to see if they were related. He restrained himself, but it was strange. 𝐻𝐻𝐿 walked up and ordered his usual black coffee and a chocolate chip muffin. Aizawa gets the same things, except the muffin is blueberry. It was surreal to say the least. Izuku happily began the kid's coffee and plated the muffin before bringing it out. "Here you are." 𝐻𝐮𝐬𝐽𝐻 nodded in response. He only ever talked when making an order, but Izuku was determined to get a name today. There were only 2 other customers who were college students that came here often to work on their laptops, so Izuku could take a short break. "My name is Megumi Izuku. I've seen you here a few times now, so I thought I'd introduce myself." The kid, can he call him a kid even though he is taller than Izuku? Simply looked up at him with slight shock and weariness. Izuku just kept his warm smile on and waited for a reply. 𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐿 shifted in his seat before looking down at his hands. "Shinso Hitoshi, nice to meet you Shinso-kun. I was wondering how old you were since you seem about my age." Dimen his social awkwardness, how do people make conversations? "I'm 13 Izuku smiled. "Wow, I'm 13 too. I totally thought you were older than me." The one-sided conversation continued, with Shinso gradually making more comments and asking Izuku a few questions. In the end, he got Shinso to chuckle at some stupid insomniac jokes before another customer came in and he had to get back to work. When Shinso left, Izuku called out a goodbye which got him and small wave from the 𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐿 Shinso. Despite the lack of conversation from Shinso's side, Izuku had been happy when the boy started to reply more near the end. A few weeks passed by and Shinso was getting more talkative. So far Izuku knew a fair amount about the boy. He was an insomniac who wants to become a hero and doesn't have many friends, probably related to his quirk. Oh, and he loves cats and coffee, the most important facts. Izuku never asked about his quirk since he always stiffened or shuffled nervously when something similar was brought up. Izuku had held off researching the boy since he wanted to make friends with Shinso himself, plus he had no reason to. The kid wasn't a threat as far as he could tell. Seeing that he fought threats every night, he was confident that Shinso was not one. Izuku was now waiting in excitement for his new friend to come in once more. It was 8:50 on Saturday, so he would definitely arrive soon. While wiping down a table at the front of the shop, he looked out the glass and saw Shinso walking while on his phone just down the street, making Izuku smile. However, the smile was quickly dropped from his face when a group of 3 boys came up behind Shinso and pushed him towards an alleyway right next to the cafe. Shinso didn't want to talk about his quirk, and those boys were acting just like Izuku's old bullies when he still went to school years ago. Izuku wasn't dumb. Knowing what was about to happen, he rushed out after calling out to Yui that he would be right back. Izuku was practically seething in anger when he saw his new friend on the ground, surrounded by the 3 boys. The leader, he assumed, was taunting Shinso with insults about his villain quirk and how he could never be a hero, both of which set Izuku off even more as his own memories of 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 resurfaced. Izuku couldn't take it anymore. Shinso met his eyes, fear and shock swimming in them. As Izuku moved up behind the leader silently, the bully too caught up in his jeering to notice the small. Not that he would let him. He was a vigilante who had exceptional stealth skills after all. Without warning, Izuku grabbed the leader's collar and pulled him backwards sharply, a small cry of shock escaping him. Everyone was frozen as the leader bully landed on his butt. After a moment, the bullies seemed to realize that this savior in front of them was shorter than them and was probably younger and weaker. Of course, they couldn't be more wrong, but Izuku was fine with them underestimating him. It gave him the advantage. "Why are you defending a villain?" Lackey 1 sneered. "Trying to play hero. Get lost." Lackey 2 scoffed, literally and figuratively looking down on him. Izuku raised an eyebrow coldly, holding back his bloodlust for now. "Villain, you say? Have any of you actually met a villain before?" Apparently, that just made them angrier, especially the leader whose face was now red from embarrassment and anger at the small kid who caught him off guard. "What are you talking about, Pipsqueak? As if you would know. This guy is a DMN villain. Go play hero somewhere else, shorty." Izuku almost wanted to laugh. They had watched him pick up their leader by the collar of his shirt to throw him down, and they seriously kept picking a fight while thinking he was some small, scrawny kid. It would be hilarious if Shinso wasn't still on the ground, scared for him and still shaking a bit. "Time to wrap this up. Actually, I think it's time for you 3 to get lost. I have to get back to work and you guys are pissing me off." He gave them a sharp smile and a hateful glare through his eyes. They stupidly decided to charge. Well, this is just self-defense. A few moments later, the three kids were on the ground, one with a bloody nose and another with a bruised arm. Seeing that they weren't a match, they begrudgingly rushed away, calling out a few insults once they were far enough away. "You're just as much of a villain, freak, next time we won't lose." Izuku gave a dry laugh before calling back, "As if you weren't literally the villains here, you can't beat me, so just F off." Clapping his hand together, Izuku turned to face a curled-up 𝗀𝐿, who was starting to hyperventilate. His anger faded to concern. Izuku thought, "I was so focused on the bullies in my anger that I forgot 𝗀𝐿 was probably in shock from me seeing him like this." He took out his phone and began to play a calming instrumental song that Izuku used for himself when he had panic attacks before approaching the boy. "Hey," he spoke softly, "can I come sit next to you, 𝗀𝐿?" There was a pause of silence before the purple-haired boy nodded slowly, still in a daze. With that, Izuku shuffled to sit down on the ground a few inches away from 𝗀𝐿 and asked him to breathe with him. After a few deep breaths together combined with the gentle music and murmurs of encouragement from Izuku, 𝗀𝐿 relaxed and looked away from him. "Thanks." Izuku gave a gentle smile and put away his phone. "It's no problem, I have this song saved and practice breathing exercises for myself." 𝗀𝐿 glanced over, a bit shocked but also comforted. Izuku guessed that he normally doesn't get help with attacks and didn't know anyone in a similar situation. Standing up, Izuku dusted off his breaths quickly before extending a hand to the taller boy. "Come on, let's get inside, we could probably both use a coffee." 𝗀𝐿 accepted the hand and let Izuku lead him into the cafe where a worried Yui was cleaning off a table. When she saw them, she started fussing about how Izuku had worried her by leaving so suddenly. He just comforted her that it wasn't anything serious and asked if he could take a break for a moment. After getting confirmation, Izuku moved over to 𝗀𝐿, who was sitting in his normal booth, looking down in thought. "Hey, did you get hurt anywhere? We have a first aid kit in the back." 𝗀𝐿 just shook his head before wincing slightly at the movement. Izuku slowly reached his hand out and looked over his face. There was a small cut on his jaw and probably a bruise as well. Without a word, Izuku went and grabbed the kit before crouching down slightly in front of the taller, now sitting boy. "I can do it my stash. It's fine, I'm not letting you do it without a mirror nor after an attack." Izuku cut him off with a smile, leaving no room for negotiation while gently dabbing disinfectant on the wound. 𝗀𝐿 just looked at the ground in silence while Izuku bandaged up his jaw, equally silent. Once finished, Izuku decided that he needed to talk first. So he packed up the kit and sat down across from him, the kit sitting next to him in the booth. They were right. You'll just get picked on too for siding with a villain. Apparently, he didn't need to start the conversation, thank goodness, cause he had no idea how. But the way 𝗀𝐿 had called himself a villain made Izuku wish he had hurt those bullies more. "What do you mean? Are you a villain?" Honestly, Izuku wanted to ask a lot of questions because he didn't like not knowing things that other people did, but he held his tongue. 𝗀𝐿 would get overwhelmed, and he might trigger him again, especially if he asked about his quirk. "No. I want to be a hero, but my quirk. It's not good. Or heroic." Izuku hummed, "Do you mind telling me what it is? If you want to." 𝗀𝐿 shook his head. "You should know. It's called brainwashing." He spoke the last two words in a whisper. Izuku's eyes widened and 𝗀𝐿 braced for Izuku to yell at him or get up and leave. Instead, the black-haired boy smiled and began to ramble excitedly. "Oh my gosh, that would be perfect for hero work. Especially as an underground hero, you could make villains turn themselves in without a fight and easily dispel any hostage situations. And you could use some cool support gear, like a voice changer and maybe a scarf like Eraserhead. I know you like him and so do I. He is just like you, his quirk affects other people but doesn't strengthen himself. Maybe you could intern with him one day. I would be so jealous if you did. Not to mention, wait, are you okay?" Izuku cut himself off as he saw tears begin to fall down 𝗀𝐿's face. Did he say anything wrong? Maybe he had guessed wrong about Eraserhead. Or perhaps he had, "Yeah, I'm fine, it's just. No one has ever told me that kind of things before." "Thank Nizu, Those are happy tears, he thought. I'm serious here, trust me, I study heroes in my free time, and some of the best heroes are like Eraserhead with weak or non-heroic quirks. The top heroes like All Might and that flaming trash can of a number 2 hero are only popular because of their flashy quirks, but they honestly cause more damage at times with their lack of restraint. I mean, they practically put half their paycheck back into property damages alone. Izuku rolled his eyes dramatically and 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 chuckled. After talking about heroes, Izuku asked more about 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐴's quirk. The boy was nervous, but answered and was pleasantly surprised with how the other just smiled and talked excitingly about possibilities and now it could be used in heroics. But then, 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐴 asked the dreaded question Izuku had been avoiding. So what's your quirk? I don't mean to pry, I was just curious. Izuku laughed as 𝐀𝐮𝐴 looked away with a slight tint of pink embarrassment to his cheeks. The funny thing is, I kinda don't have one. 𝐀𝐮𝐴's head snapped up, looking at him with wide eyes, but Izuku decided to just be blunt. I'm quirkless. There was a silence and Izuku worried that maybe even 𝐀𝐮𝐴 would hate him now. It wasn't likely knowing him, but years of rejection made Izuku's mind buzz with worry. Really? It was said with a slightly shocked tone, but no malice or disgust, which made Izuku inwardly sigh in relief. I got the whole extra joint in my pinky toe and everything. He rubbed his head nervously, letting out a small laugh at the end. Wow, 𝐀𝐮𝐴 leaned back. That's impressive. I was thinking you might have some strength after earlier or maybe an analysis one with you knowledge of heroes, but Dimon. Izuku just smiled, happy for his acceptance and kind words. Thanks, you can probably guess, but I was bullied too before I moved to online classes a few years ago. Picking up his coffee, 𝐀𝐮𝐴 nodded and sipped at the hot drink. The next half hour was spent with them talking and drinking coffee. Yui had even insisted that they take their time and was fine working for a bit on her own since it wasn't busy at the time. But eventually 𝐀𝐮𝐴 needed to head home and work on some homework. You can bring it here next time if you want, 𝐀𝐮𝐴-kun. I can even help you if you want, Izuku told him as they walked towards the door. Hitoshi, huh? Izuku looked up at the taller boy who rolled his eyes and looked away. You told me to call you Izuku, so it's only normal for you to do the same. Izuku smiled brightly. Sure thing, Toshi. Whatever, Zuku. The nickname made Izuku giggle and he asked to trade phone numbers. After Hitoshi was out of sight, Izuku screamed internally. He had a real friend. And now he was going to help said friend become a hero no matter what. He would even fight the number 1 hero if he so much as hesitated to tell 𝐀𝐮𝐴 he could be a hero or flat out turn his dream down. Just like he had denied Izuku all those years ago. It was the Monday after Hitoshi and Izuku had exchanged numbers, and despite it only being 2 days later, their messages were filled with cat memes. Being the insomniac he is, Hitoshi had texted Izuku at 2 a.m. last night, contemplating life sarcastically before sending a ton of cat memes and videos. Izuku was on patrol as Rabbit, but there wasn't much activity, so he had sat down on a roof and texted back a few of his own cat memes before telling Hitoshi he had to get ready for work in an hour. Of course, it was somewhat true, but Hitoshi needed to try and get some sleep. He knew he wasn't one to talk, but his friend isn't a vigilante and actually has to go to school, so Izuku can scold him. Apparently though, Hitoshi wasn't able to sleep well and came into the cafe at 6 a.m., just missing Eraserhead, who left half an hour ago after drinking 3 cups of coffee and eating a blueberry muffin. The bell jingled, and Izuku was already walking over to the insomniac, who looked even more tired than usual. Hey Toshi, what are you doing here so early? Don't you have school? In response, Hitoshi sighed and sat down in his regular booth, a hand pinching his nose. Can I get some coffee first? Izuku just chuckled, your brain not awake enough to hold a conversation. Hitoshi laid his head down on the table and hummed in confirmation, so Izuku rushed back and made coffee for both him and Hitoshi. As soon as the cup was set down, Hitoshi took it and drank a few gulps before placing it back down with a sigh. Izuku just sipped at his coffee. So, what are you doing here before school? Just for the great coffee or? Hitoshi glanced at him and then sighed once more. He sighs just as much as Eraserhead when he is tired. Izuku noted down in his mental, Hitoshi is Eraserhead's long-lost son. Folder. Actually, I did need some good coffee since I barely slept last night, but that's not the only reason. Hitoshi looked down at his coffee nervously before taking another gulp of it. With a hum, Izuku just sat and waited for the boy to say what he wanted, though Izuku's nerves started to buzz. Maybe he realized that he didn't want to hang out with a quirkless failure despite the past few days Izuku's brain helpfully supplied. But he shook off the thought. Hitoshi wouldn't have come all the way here before school just to tell Izuku off. He took a deep breath before speaking. Well, I was kind of hoping to ask you a favor. Now that made Izuku stiffen slightly because what on earth could Izuku help Hitoshi with? Instead of showing his confusion and unease, Izuku just leaned back and sipped at his coffee, trying to act casual. Shoot, could you help me train? Izuku blinked in surprise, but his brain quickly began to fill in the blanks he was so stupid to have missed. He literally just talked about how Eraserhead fights Quirkless and that Hitoshi was in a very similar boat the other day after beating those bullies. Not to mention, Hitoshi watched Izuku kick their assess while being Quirkless himself, so it only made sense that Hitoshi would want his help training so he could become a hero. He had mentioned Yue a few times in their conversation on Saturday, so Izuku knew he would be aiming for the hero course, which was, aggravatingly, biased towards flashy and destructive quirks. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked, you are very busy. Hitoshi's voice broke Izuku out of his daze and he realized that he had just left Hitoshi in silence instead of responding. Oh no, I would absolutely love to help you train. I just got too excited and forgot to respond is all. Sorry. He rubbed his neck and laughed sheepishly. The purple boy's eyes widened almost comedically. Wait, really? You want to? Izuku just smiled back at him. Of course, I don't know if I'll be a good teacher, but I want to try. With that, Hitoshi was surprised and thankful while Izuku just steered the conversation to what Hitoshi wanted to learn and his goals. Of course he told Izuku that UA Hero course was his goal, but he was worried about the exams, both the practical and the paper test. Luckily, Izuku had already finished his high school degree a while ago, so he could also help out with the test portion. Izuku even brought up the backup plan in case Hitoshi only got into the general education course. If he did, Izuku said he would storm the school, which made Hitoshi laugh, but Izuku was only half joking. He told Hitoshi that Eraserhead, the boy's idol, had gotten transferred into the hero course from general education after winning the sports festival when he was a student. And if it came down to that, Izuku would do everything to make Hitoshi win. Even if it meant hacking into UA and changing challenges or matchups, but Hitoshi didn't need to know that. The real issue was when they could train. Izuku had work basically every day except Sunday, but he usually slept after work at the cafe since the night was dedicated to vigilante work. So on weekdays he really wasn't free. Even on his shorter days that he got off at noon were hard to plan since Hitoshi wasn't out of school until 3 p.m. when Izuku was already asleep. In the end, Izuku asked Hitoshi to come to the cafe on Saturday like usual and then they could plan things out then. Plus it gave Izuku time to think about a training plan for Hitoshi instead of having to scrabble something together on the spot. It was Friday morning, the day before Hitoshi and Izuku would cement the boys' training schedule and study schedule to Hitoshi's dismay in the form of several cat memes. Izuku had a solid plan ready to propose and work out with Hitoshi, including a longer-term schedule that would up the difficulty and add new elements as time went on. On top of that, Izuku had talked with Yui about working less hours, but still coming in every morning as usual. She had agreed since he would still be baking the pastries in the morning and make Eraserhead's coffee. For some reason, she insisted that the hero liked him and loved his coffee to the point that his day wouldn't be the same without it. Izuku had no clue why she thought that, but he wasn't planning on leaving the hero hanging anyways. Eraser was fun to talk to some mornings when he was less grouchy. Speaking of, the hero had just entered the cafe once more today and Izuku already had his coffee ready, bringing it over as soon as the hero sat down with a sigh. Izuku placed down the coffee while the man opened up a folder and began looking through it, barely glancing up and nodding in thanks for the coffee. Now Izuku could sneak a peek at the folder since he was going crazy with curiosity, but the hero wasn't dumb and would defiantly catch him. So instead, Izuku just walked away and continued his morning baking. But nearly an hour later, the hero was still here looking at that folder. When the hero finally placed the folder down on the table and pinched his nose with a sigh, Izuku saw his chance. He brought over the pot of coffee and began to refill the hero's mug before speaking, "What's got you sighing more than usual?" The hero chuckled before taking a swig from his now refilled cup, even though the liquid was probably still scalding hot. "Just a vigilante case I've been put on." Izuku perked up, both in excitement and nervousness. Who was it? He knew a few vigilantes in Japan, ranging from veterans who had evaded capture for over 10 years to newer faces that were starting out. Sure, he didn't interact with them except on a secure website they used that was invite-only, but he still had some kinship with them. "Well," the hero continued, "this guy has been active for 3 years now and still doesn't have a proper description. The only note on his appearance is a flash of dark green and rabbit ears on his hood." Izuku felt a chill run down his spine. Wait, does he mean Dash? He goes by Rabbit. Izuku was shocked and weirdly happy that his idol hero got put on his case, but he was defiantly on edge now that he was out for his nightly patrol. That morning, Izuku had talked with Eraser a bit about Rabbit and took a small risk saying that he liked the vigilante since he seemed to do a lot of good. Luckily, the hero had agreed and grumbled a complaint about him being a problem child. Izuku had to hold back his surprise that the hero agreed. Most heroes would complain about laws and being too lazy to get a license, but Eraser hadn't. It made Izuku's chest warm in happiness while solidifying Eraserhead's #1 spot in his mind. It was strange to think about now, that the hero who has been drinking his coffee almost every morning for nearly a year was now on his case. The hero didn't know that, but obviously Izuku did, and the thought was surreal to him. Unfortunately, tonight was an information night for Izuku. He had spent a few hours hacking and compiling information to a flash drive before finally heading out at midnight. He had spent the past few nights out in the field and had forgotten to gather information in a while, so there was a lot to collect this time around. Rabbit landed on a rooftop next to the police station and used the new zoom function of his visor to look into the window that he always used. It led straight into Detective Tsukachi's office. At this point, the detective would purposefully leave the window with a weak lock on it so that Rabbit could slip in and out without an issue, but he was always careful. Even if the detective hadn't tried to arrest him in months, even when they saw each other in his office, Rabbit tried not to get comfortable. They could decide to actually go after him anytime. The office was dimly lit, but there was no sign of the detective inside, so Izuku quickly unlocked the window and slid in. He had 2 flash drives this time around. There was a lot of information and he needed to separate them into an urgent and less urgent file, so different flash drives was the best answer. Sticky notes in place, Rabbit began to open the small window when the door suddenly squeaked open. Izuku perched himself on the windowsill and locked eye with the tired man in a trench coat. "Rabbit?" Tsukachi greeted. He had started going numb to seeing Rabbit in his office after years of occurrences. "Another information night. It's been a while." Izuku just nodded and tilted his head towards the desk where his 2 flash drives sat. The detective picked them up, reading the notes. He sighed, "Thank you for the extra paperwork," a small smile tugging upwards despite the man's late-night fatigue. Rabbit just nodded again and slipped out the window, disappearing into the shadows. After leaving the station, Izuku couldn't help but think about Eraserhead. The hero was on his case now and that meant that they might run into each other. Sure, Izuku has never let anyone, especially a hero, see him too clearly. Even victims didn't see him long, usually in too much shock to recall details about the vigilante. But Eraserhead was different. Not just because Izuku loved the hero as his favorite, but he had heard straight from the hero himself that he liked Rabbit. That meant that he probably wouldn't be too persistent or focused on his capture. Best case, Izuku hoped they could work together or become some kind of friends. Worst case, the hero would believe that taking him in would help the vigilante or some bullshit. "Maybe he would try to make me a hero," Izuku mumbled sarcastically, knowing that it was impossible and getting caught would reveal that. Either way, Izuku found himself actually looking out for the hero that night. Even if he didn't show himself, he wanted to see the hero in action. He was disappointed in the end. The hero never showed and Izuku needed to get going. Today he was going to start training Hitoshi after work, and he would need a lot of coffee for that. Just as planned, Hitoshi arrived at 10 a.m., right as Izuku was about to finish his shift for the day. He originally worked until noon, but with his schedule change, he decided to get off earlier so that he had more time to spend with Hitoshi. Izuku smiled at the boy and went to go grab them both their coffees plus a few pastries. When he sat down, Hitoshi looked up, excitement dancing in his eyes along with traces of anxiety. Izuku felt the same way. He had trained himself, but he didn't know if it would work for Hitoshi the way it did for him. Before Hitoshi could say anything, Izuku pulled out a notebook and some papers from his backpack. Okay, so first, I need to know your current physical condition, any training or skills, and any past injuries that weren't small scrapes or bruises. Izuku listened as the boy recited all the information, writing down all the information into the first 2 pages of the notebook. Of course, they could have just texted this information, but Izuku wanted to do this with Hitoshi present to make a kind of point. When they looked back to today, he wanted Hitoshi to really feel his progress, and texts didn't really hold the sentiment. After that was finished, Izuku showed him the notebook and looked at him blankly. I'll be honest with you. I am impressed with your current scores. They are better than I expected. Hitoshi gave him a glare. That being said, I currently can do around 3 times more than you in most scores, which means you still have a lot you can work on. Honestly, Izuku thinks he should surprise Hitoshi more. It was hilarious to see his eyes widen and jaw slightly drop out of his usual bored expression. Fortunately for him, Izuku wasn't done talking. This isn't a bad thing, it just means that you can still improve a lot and I can help you not form bad habits. Believe me, when I finally decided to look at some proper lessons for combat, it took me a while to get rid of things I learned incorrectly. Lucky for you, you have only done some strength and endurance, which means I won't have to correct anything when we get to combat. Hitoshi just nodded, face back to its natural bored look, but his eyes were definitely focused and sparkling. Izuku took back the notebook, turning to the next clean pages, and began to jot down a schedule. This, he tapped his pencil on the now filled pages, will be phase 1 of your training. Hitoshi pet his head curiously. Phase 1. Izuku nodded excitingly. Yup. I have a few routines planned out for the future, but for right now, you will be focused mostly on strength and endurance as well as flexibility. Those first 2 are ones you are already doing good with, but I'm more worried about how flexible you are. At Hitoshi's confused face, mouth slightly open in a question, Izuku chuckled. Flexibility is important for combat and so that you don't hurt yourself when doing, well, everything. Building too much muscle without working on flexibility will make you stiff. I know we only talked about your current flexibility and I haven't actually looked at it, but I can tell you need to work on it a lot more. For example, how can you learn to kick someone in the chest if you can't even bring your leg up that high while standing? Or how about a backflip? It can help you out distance between you and an opponent. Izuku paused him rambling, looking at Hitoshi who seemed to be taking the information in stride. Good, hopefully his brain works this well when we start combat practice. With that, Izuku and Hitoshi continued to talk. Well, Izuku did most of the talking and 2 hours later, they had a solid plan for Hitoshi to follow. Since Izuku worked on weekdays, he could only train with Hitoshi after work on Saturday and most all of Sunday. When Izuku was there, they would check his progress and work on simple self-defense moves before doing schoolwork, Hitoshi's favorite part. During the week, Hitoshi would train on his own, stretching for half an hour every morning before going on a jog and stretching some more after. After school, he would do the same thing, but with strength training instead of jogging. After the first week, Hitoshi complained that he was dying, but a month later, he told Izuku that he had been getting some of the best sleep in all his years. His body was so tired from the training that his mind couldn't keep him up at night, though it sometimes still succeeded. Izuku had been the same way when he started training at 10 years old, but now the fatigue effect had worn off and he was back to only needing a few hours plus coffee every day to be in top shape. The next 2 months flew by, marking it having been 3 months since they first began their routine. Most of their training happened in the nearby park that was usually empty, especially in the more wooded area since gyms cost money and they couldn't risk falling on concrete. A little over a month in, Izuku had started to give Hitoshi actual combat lessons that focused on attack and not so much defense and even deemed the boy ready for parkour. Strength and endurance training was mostly replaced with combat practice, Izuku would work on a few moves on the weekend and even record a bit of their sessions so that Hitoshi could practice on his own time during the week. Izuku had quickly found that Hitoshi was no prodigy, but he worked hard and had a good head for the mechanics of things. He would understand how something was done, but it could take a week or so to get it down near perfectly in actual sparring. But that just made Izuku happier with his friend. Unlike most kids who wanted to be a hero just because they had a good quirk and thought they didn't need anything else, Hitoshi was actually aiming and determined to be a hero. Even when people told him he couldn't, he had held on to his goal and worked towards it, even if it just meant asking Izuku for help. Hitoshi had even started to practice his parkour on his own after Izuku had given him a few maps on safe routes he could practice on alone. He wasn't about to let his friend wander into a bad part of town or try anything dangerous until he got more skilled and went with Izuku a few times, but he also knew that Hitoshi really liked parkour. Something about it feeling freeing, which Izuku could definitely understand. This is good, Izuku thought to himself while swinging his legs over the edge of the building he was currently on, resting after stopping several crimes in a row. He was surprised with how content he felt, and he smiled under his rabbit mask. This is good. Aizawa POV. It's been 3 months, and Aizawa still hasn't been able to come in contact with the Vigilante, Rabbit. While it wasn't confirmed, Aizawa was 70% sure that Rabbit was young, maybe not even 18 yet. From the reports about the kid's attitude, he seemed more like a teenager, but at the same time, he could act professional and was very skilled. Something that was definitely not teenager-like. It was giving the hero a headache just thinking about it. He groaned tiredly and rubbed his eyes. Even Tsukachi found it a bit strange that Rabbit hadn't been spotted by the hero yet. Usually, the Vigilante would give heroes or policemen quips or snarky remarks, never too unkind, just sassy and playful, as well as leave biodegradable glitter bombs or some other small prank for them to find. But here Aizawa was with nothing of the sort having happened. The hero would sometimes see a shadowed blur of movement of green and red which he could only assume was Rabbit. But he never stayed for more than a second, running off as soon as Aizawa arrived. Tsukachi had joked that maybe he was scared or shy since Aizawa looked grumpy and scary. Whatever the case was, Aizawa wanted to at least see the kid once. The most he had was a few notes left behind at crime scenes within our signature. Sighing, Aizawa checked the time. His patrol was almost over and he was ready to go and get his morning cups of coffee. Aizawa walked into the warm cafe and hid a smile as the black-haired boy was cleaning and humming to some gentle music before turning to face the hero with a soft smile, welcoming him in. In response, the hero just grunted and sat down with the Rabbit file once again. There wasn't much new information, just a few extra reports and one blurry photo that didn't tell them much. It didn't even show his face. The kid, Izuku, brought out his coffee and asked him if he has found the Vigilante yet. Aizawa just shook his head and sighed. I've been looking for over 3 months and the most I've ever seen is his shadow when he leaves and a note with his signature. Frowning, the kid asked if the hero knew why since the file clearly stated he could be a prankster to heroes. Aizawa thought back to what Tsukachi said and gave the kid a small smile. Well, the detective that gave me this case thinks that maybe Rabbit is scared of me or something. Izuku's eyes widened, and a small mischievous smile danced onto his lips. That's a solid theory, Aizawa. Glared half-heartedly at the kid, but he doesn't seem like the type to be scared of a hero just because he looks grumpy. Aizawa rolled his eyes while the kid smiled, a mischievous look still gleaming in his eyes. The hero was glad that the kid was more relaxed around him than he had been when they first met, but he didn't realize that the kid could be anything but sweet as his usual demeanor suggested. I agree, but I can't think of any real reason. Aizawa looked back into the file, scanning information. Beside him, the kid hummed in thought before another impish smile appeared. Maybe he like you, like a fan. Aizawa sighed and shook his head while the kid moved away, getting back to cleaning the tables. The hero smiled to himself as the kid began to hum to music once again, seemingly unaware that he was. It was a peaceful environment that Aizawa had come to love. Yes, the coffee was godly, but the cafe itself was clean and warm, inviting. It made the hero feel calm after a long night of taking down criminals and villains, even when his patrols were rough. Aizawa slowly drank his coffee, and the kid was perfectly on time to refill it, as if he just always knew when the hero needed more. Even though the kid was kind and gentle, he had a sarcastic and mischievous side to him, not to mention the few times that the manager, Yui, had told him stories about Izuku. Apparently, some kids were picking on one of Izuku's friends who had a villain quirk, but the tiny kid just stepped in and scared them off. And Aizawa wasn't dumb. The kid wore long sleeves, but he definitely worked out and had an air about him that he could take care of himself. Aizawa just hoped the kid wouldn't get into any serious fights or used his quirk illegally, not that the hero knew what it was, probably a mental one he guessed. Either way, there was only one way he would describe this Izuku kid, problem child number 2, with Rabbit being problem child #, even though he wasn't sure about Rabbit's age, the Vigilante was definitely not out of high school yet at the least. With another long sigh, the hero went back to his peaceful morning before he had to teach a ton of overconfident brats at UA. A week later, Izuku finally decided to show himself to Eraserhead, as Rabbit of course. Izuku waited for the hero to finish handing the criminals over to the police, and when Eraser saw him, he paused for only a moment before running after him. Perfect, Izuku thought, I'll just get him away from the cops real quick. Izuku would disappear and purposefully reappear in order to lead the hero away from the crime scene. Once they were in a quiet neighborhood a few blocks away, Rabbit stopped and waited. Eraser landed on the other side of the roof, both remaining silent in anticipation. Izuku had led him here and now he didn't know what to say. He really should have practiced something. A sigh broke him out of his racing thoughts. I don't want to arrest you, kid. You've never been seen using a quirk anyways, so there's no point. Izuku smiled under his mask. This was a good start. Why do you think I'm a kid? His voice was distorted and sounded like auto-tune gone horribly wrong, but it worked for him. Well, you're shorter than most of my high school students and act like a sassy teenager. Unless you're actually an adult. Izuku decided not to answer and instead just sat on the edge of his building, watching the hero sigh before approaching to sit a few feet away from him. Since he didn't get an answer, Eraser moved on. Why are you out here doing this? You seem too young to and could have easily become a hero. Izuku sat silently for a moment. He couldn't tell the hero that he was quirkless, not yet. That could give himself away. Not many people are quirkless these days, and Eraser might decide to capture him after saying something like, "It's too dangerous." He may not seem like the type, but Izuku learned that not everyone was what they seemed. I want to help people, he answered quietly. The hero turned to him slightly confused before raising an eyebrow. Well, like I said, why not go to a hero school or get a license? Izuku just shook his head sadly. I can't be a hero. Without waiting for a reply, Izuku hopped over the edge and landed in a roll on the ground. But before he could run away and disappear, the gruff hero's voice called out to him. If you ever need help, you can come to me. Izuku looked back and noticed the hero was standing on the ledge, hands stuffed into his pockets, relaxed and non-threatening. It made Izuku smile under his mask. With a nod of acknowledgement, Izuku ran off and continued his patrol until it was time for him to head to work. The next 7 months since that meeting with Eraserhead as Rabbit flew by for Izuku. It took a while, but Izuku had finally stopped running away from Eraserhead on instinct. He knew what the hero said about not wanting to catch him, but come on. He was a hero and Izuku was a vigilante. It was literally the hero's job to catch him. And sure, maybe Izuku has some trust issues, but he would never admit it, not even to himself. There was a small incident that finally allowed him to relax around the hero. They had been fighting a group of thugs together and the vigilante had slipped up. He had ended up with a knife buried in his thigh. As they were fighting, a gunshot rang out unexpectedly from the direction of Eraserhead, and Izuku, despite his usual level-headedness, had looked away from his opponent to check on the hero. The hero was fine, but Izuku had gotten stabbed in the leg. After that, Izuku quickly took down his opponent and he had attempted to run away before the hero could even notice, preoccupied with making sure all the villains were secure. Unfortunately, Izuku had tripped on the stairs of the fire escape, hissing in pain as his bleeding leg hit the metal. The hero had climbed up after him immediately. Before Izuku could protest, the hero had helped get him up to the rooftop where he carefully treated the vigilante's wound. Izuku knew the hero was somewhat upset at his carelessness, but he seemed to also be rude. It was as if he was concerned for Izuku, which made his chest clench slightly with a warmth spreading through his lungs in happiness. Or maybe it was just the pain. It was probably just the pain. Afterwards, the hero told him to head home and not patrol for the next week. Izuku had watched him start to leave in confusion, mind racing. In the end he could only call out on word. Why? Eraser paused and turned slightly back. What do you mean? But why are you helping me? And letting me go? I can't exactly run away right now. It was a bad idea now that he looked back at the situation. He was literally giving the hero good reasons to change his mind and take him in. But he had been too curious and talked without thinking, which rarely happened. Lucky for him, Eraser just sighed and said that despite his recklessness, Rabbit was more of a hero than most actual heroes these days, not to mention a kid. He couldn't bring in someone like that. The hero had snickered and added that Rabbit had never even used a quirk, so he legally wasn't even a vigilante. In response, Izuku had just huffed, amused, and touched with the hero's honesty. That was the night that made Izuku realize that the hero had been telling the truth and wasn't about to betray him. It was a very good night besides the pain in his leg and the way he had to cover it up a few hours later at work when serving the hero. Ever since then, Izuku had started to patrol. With Eraser a lot more. They would take care of the bad guys, and after, Izuku would just wait for the hero to finish with the police while scouting other targets. Knowing that the hero had his back was weird. It was strange, foreign to Izuku, but not unwelcome. About a month after they started their routine, Izuku was waiting for Eraser to finish with the police when he heard a soft noise. He soon found the source in a nearby alleyway. A dirty cardboard box sat over top of the muffled sound. Eraserhead had soon joined him, looking around in confusion before his face morphed to realization at another soft chirp came from the box. Izuku slowly lifted the box to find a small kitten underneath it, trembling from fear and the cold. He slowly reached his hand out. The kitten sniffed it before rubbing her head against it. Smiling under his mask, Izuku gently picked up the kitten and cradled it to his chest. Eraser had just stood a few feet away, watching with a small smile hidden under his scarf, but by now Izuku could tell when the hero was hiding one. Turning to the hero, Izuku asked about shelters nearby that he could run to. The hero thought for a moment before telling Rabbit that he should take the cat home with him. It seemed attached to him already. Izuku paused but eventually nodded, smiling even more as he scratched the kitten's head. The next day after work, he bought cat toys and care items for his new cat he had named Sushi. Her eyes were appealing, one was gold, and the other was a soft violet. As she grew healthy and older, her fur became thick and fluffy, her ears folded down on her head, an obvious sign of some Scottish fold genes. It was surprisingly easy to get her a vet appointment and register her in the system as his cat. Eventually, Izuku had started bringing her into the cafe with him. Yui had agreed after meeting Sushi and deeming her docile and a perfect addition. Now, Izuku was scared the Eraser might recognize her, but after thinking it over, it was unlikely. The alley had been dark and Sushi hadn't opened her eyes until they were home, not to mention that a few months passed before he brought her to work, so her fur was now clean and fluffy. Fortunately, he was right and his peaceful life continued, now with his fluffy companion who was the only family he had, but it was more than before. Aizawa POV months had gone by and Eraser had gotten a bit more information about Rabbit. After their first meeting, Rabbit had eventually stopped running from the hero at first sight and even began his usual small pranks on the tired hero. Despite his annoyance of having glitter forever stuck on his clothes, Aizawa couldn't help but smile. The kid was acting as he had prior to when Eraser first went after him. One night, the detective asked Eraser to go after a small group of mid-level criminals, but the hero was confused why he was the only one being asked to go. Not that he couldn't handle it, but backup would have been nice. Tsukachi had smiled and told him that Rabbit was the one who found their base and wanted to strike tonight, but he knew he couldn't handle them alone, so he wanted Eraser's help. They surprisingly worked together perfectly and got out with minimal injuries. Since then, they team up at least once a week for patrol or some kind of raid. Eraser even gave the kid his and Tsukachi's phone numbers in case he needed to contact them. Of course, the kid had immediately made a group chat with them three and used it to send information as well as locations for defeated criminals. 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗟𝗘 even started to ask the kid to help in difficult cases ranging from child neglect to large drag rings. Needless to say, Aizawa was proud of his problem child. Sure, he was sometimes reckless, but he usually knew when to pull out or ask for help. Thanks to that, the kid rarely gets more than a few scrapes and bruises. It was a relief to Aizawa that the kid wasn't dumb, but that didn't stop him from tackling situations he shouldn't. The kid was just too selfless at times, a true hero in nature, always wanting to help others without full regard for himself. When Aizawa had asked him about it one night, asking how he could be so quickly selfless but somehow not reckless, the kid had surprised him. With a shrug, the problem child said that if he was brought down, then the victim would be in even more danger, so why would he purposefully sabotage himself? Aizawa loved the kid even more because that was exactly how he thought about fights. Prioritize the rescue first, but also prioritize yourself or else you couldn't save anyone. Not if you're dead or incapacitated. His problem child number 1 was just like him and thought rationally while still acting on emotions, even though the hero would never admit that last part. Izuku was almost 100% happy with his current life. He got to save people almost every night, had started to work with his favorite hero as a tag team, adopted an adorable cat, worked at a coffee shop where he could get free coffee, and he had a friend who was going to easily become a great hero. However, there was a problem with said friend, and that was his foster family. Izuku wasn't stupid, and years of experience taught him how to read people and their mannerisms. He had a natural affinity when it came to analyzing people, but he had also spent time practicing it. And the way that Hitoshi sometimes reacted or talked about himself paired with how closed off he was about his home life, among other small hints, were clear red flags to Izuku. Obviously, he was bullied. Izuku had literally fought off said bullies when they first got close, but there was more to it. Hitoshi would seem to almost refrain from talking too much, nodding or using gestures instead of verbal responses. It had taken some time for Izuku to help him shake off that habit with him, and eventually the quiet boy started to use his voice more. No way some bullies made him that scared of his talking. It was devised from either the teachers or his home life. And the latter was much more reasonable with the way he would avoid talk of his parents or family. As much as Izuku hated it, he knew firsthand how bad quirk discrimination was. During their study session on Sunday, Izuku tried to subtly steer the conversation for more information. Eventually, Hitoshi accidentally slipped that he was living with some foster parents a few days ago. Izuku didn't react but filed away the information for later, which brought him to today. As Rabbit, Izuku had taken down plenty of abuse cases. They hit close to home for him, and he couldn't stand the way that some people could treat their kids, the ones they were supposed to care for and love. It made him sick. Even to the point that Eraserhead and Detective 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗟𝗘 had picked up on it and purposefully asked for help in some of those cases. But this one was personal. His friend, the only one who didn't judge him and wanted to spend time with him besides just training, was the victim. Right now, he was following Hitoshi home after their training session. Sure, he knew their address from hacking the system, but he could learn a lot from just watching Hitoshi as he walked there. As soon as Izuku had found him after saying their goodbyes, Hitoshi was walking with slumped shoulders and a bored expression. His eyes, however, were laced with a silent fear. He was scared to go home, and now Izuku was contemplating if he could kidnap him right now. I could create a new identity for him and make it so he was adopted by my father, who doesn't really exist. Izuku mused to himself, he could start online schooling like I did. In the end, Izuku trashed the idea. Hitoshi didn't need to become like him, someone without an actual home or family who had to work his butt off to live. Besides, it wasn't 100% confirmed that his foster parents were abusive, so he had to hold off either way. A few minutes later, Hitoshi walked up to a plain-looking house. Nothing impressive but nothing run down either. Just a normal beige house. The boy walked slowly up to the door and slid inside silently. As soon as Hitoshi closed the door and began taking off his shoes, he was met with a slap and yelling from his foster parents asking why he was out so late and if he was doing anything illegal. When the boy opened his mouth, he was slapped once more and told not to speak. Instead, the boy signed to them that he was with a friend, and they lost track of time. The parents didn't fully believe him and sent him to his room, saying that he missed dinner and there wasn't any left for him. He had just nodded and rushed up the stairs to presumably his room. Izuku had to clench his fists and grind his teeth to stifle down his anger and his raging urge to get his friend out of there. Kidnapping was getting more appealing by the second, but Izuku retrained himself. Now they had been inside for this whole 𝐬𝐮𝐻𝐵 show, so how did Izuku see all this? Simple, he had made a few small drones that looked like a fly months ago and used one to follow Hitoshi inside. While he did feel bad about the lack of privacy he was giving his friend, Izuku couldn't sit by and wait for Hitoshi to say something. He was too closed off, too used to handling the pain silently. Just like Izuku. "I promise I will get you out of there," Izuku whispered while watching Hitoshi slump against his bedroom's door, tears pricking his eyes. "I'll get you somewhere safe, I swear." Izuku was tempted to bring up Hitoshi's case to Eraser and Tsukachi, but he was a bit scared they would figure him out. Sure, they already knew that he was passionate about these cases, but he knew he might slip up with this one. It was too personal. Instead, Izuku tried to help Hitoshi where he could for now. The first thing Izuku did was show up to Hitoshi's school. He was very tempted to sit at the front gate with his motorcycle and look intimidating, but he still wasn't old enough for a permit and a school would definitely report him for it. He decided that showing up was going to have to be enough. The bell rang and Izuku pretended to be chilling out at the gate, waiting. But his ears and eyes were scanning the students as they were walking out. A few whispered about him, but they were just curious so he didn't worry about them. Soon he spotted Hitoshi, but before he could get up to greet him, the boy was stopped by a group of students. Izuku recognized one of them from the group he beat up at the cafe, but the other three were new to him. The leader pushed down the purple-haired boy. "Where do you think you're going, villain?" he spat while another chuckled. He was probably about to go to his friend. "Oh yeah, he has one of those, doesn't he? I bet he just pities you." The bullied continued their insults while Izuku snuck up on them, blood boiling but anger pushed back. He needed to make an impression and he knew how. The leader had foolishly used his quirk to seem threatening and Izuku had already picked it apart mostly. "Oh, this would be fun. Your friend is definitely a villain too, after all he is hanging out with one, am I?" The group jumped. Even Hitoshi was looking at him with wide eyes while Izuku just started them down with a sharp smile and dangerous glint to his eyes. Silence froze the air before the one Izuku had recognized from months ago recognized him and cried out, "That's him. The villain's friend." In response, Izuku just turned his head and let his smile grow while shooting daggers with his eyes. This pipsqueak. Just go home, kid, you won't get lucky like last time." Obviously, the leader was an idiot. The other bullies were hesitant, they could feel the anger radiating off of the shorter boy and probably heard some rumors from those other kids that Izuku had taken down last time. At least it seems like two of them had stopped since then but had twisted the story. Izuku decided he would start with his favorite method, scare tactics. He just needed to use his words to chip away at the boys' minds and instill fear. And he knew exactly how to. "Well, Asahi, it seems you were misinformed." The confident boy's smile faltered at the use of his name. "How did you dash?" "I know a lot of things," Izuku interrupted. "For example, I know that your quirk is called plant body, and you can turn parts of yourself into vines and some other plants. I was actually meaning to ask, can you still feel your limbs when they become plants? If they were to catch on fire, would you feel them burning? Or perhaps would it damage your actual limbs if you cut off the plants? From what I have gathered, I doubt that it does to an extent, but perhaps there is a limit to it." The color had slowly drained from the bullies' faces as Izuku continued to break down the others' quirks and their weaknesses along with using their names. After they were shaking in fear, Izuku decided to tack on a bit more about their academics. The leader, Asahi, had been cheating on tests with the help of his teacher who purposefully looked away and would sometimes plant the evidence on other kids like Hitoshi for fun. Eventually Izuku finished and dropped his smile, letting his bloodlust seep out. "I dare you to so much as glare at Hitoshi again, see what happens because I will know, even if he doesn't tell me himself." With that, Izuku dragged his dazed friend away from the school to a park and calmed himself down. They sat together in silence on a bench while calming their nerves. "Thanks, Zuku." "Anytime, Toshi. 𝐻𝐮𝐬𝐴 POV Rabbit has been acting strange for the past few weeks and 𝐻𝐮𝐬𝐴 was starting to get concerned. Usually he would deny his worries, but his problem child wasn't the same alert, level-headed vigilante that he had been for several years. The kid had stopped his usual pranks for the most part, wasn't talking as much or making snarky remarks, and he seemed to be out of it most of the time between fights. Like his mind was elsewhere. Just the other night, Rabbit tripped while they were crossing rooftops and nearly fell off a building. 𝐻𝐮𝐬𝐴 swears he almost had a heart attack. To make it worse, the kid had just laughed it off and said he must be tired and should head home soon when it was clearly more than just a bit of sleepiness. As tempted the hero was to sit him down and interrogate the vigilante for answers, he couldn't. Even mentioning his recent behavior to him was brushed off or avoided. And it's not like his lies were convincing either. 𝐻𝐮𝐬𝐴 knew for a fact that the kid had lied or told half-truths before, but they were hard to spot. These half-hearted lies were obvious and unlike him. 𝐻𝐮𝐬𝐴 wasn't sure what to do. Perhaps 𝐬𝐶𝐾 will have some ideas. Izuku could only stare at the ground in his own shock of realization. In his own growing disgust of himself. How could he not? She was dead. And I didn't even care. I didn't even cry. Her body was still up in her bedroom where he left it. When he had come home after school, he found her in her room, cold and unmoving. Izuku had simply checked for a pulse before he began to pack what he would need to live on his own. He had hacked and changed records so that he went to live with his dad in America today and even forged a note so that it seemed like she had purposefully overdosed when he left in distraught for losing custody of her son. After that, he made himself a fake identity and ran to the store for hair dye and other necessities. His plan was going perfect. But everything came crashing down now that he was back home. The air was already starting to smell strange inside, and reality hit him. He hadn't even been upset. He had just accepted his mother's death and then thought of how he could survive. Even if she hadn't been the best mother, she still gave him a house, an education, and food. He should care. But he didn't. And he realized that they were right, everyone. He was pathetic. He was useless. He was a defect. Izuku felt his stomach lurch but ignored it as he suddenly ran to the door, shaking. He didn't deserve to live, not after the flicker of relief he felt when he found her. Not after leaving her body to prepare to save himself. Not after the way he faked a letter for her. Not after driving her to her death for the failure he was and still is. It was as if a cloud was fogging up his mind and he moved dazedly. The door was locked silently, and he made his way to a nearby building. If you want a quirk so bad, take a swan dive off a roof and pray you'll be born with one in the next life. Yeah, Izuku thought as he numbly climbed the broken and mossy stairs. I'll be reborn and I won't be a failure next time. I'll make my parents happy. Before he knew it, Izuku found himself on the edge of a 5-story building. His shoes sat neatly to the side and a short note that only said, "I'm sorry," sat on top of them. Everything was set and he felt strangely calm. With a sigh, he looked up at the sky, hoping that the next time he saw it was when he wasn't a defective failure of a person. Then he jumped. Izuku woke up with a gasp. He threw off his covers and sat up while sweat silled down his neck. Sushi was meowing urgently in concern next to him, and he tried to focus on her voice and the touch of her fur. It took a minute, but he was finally grounded. Stupid, he cursed himself before checking the time. It was currently 6 p.m., meaning he only got 3 hours of sleep. But there was no way he would be able to go back to sleep. Izuku looked back at Sushi, who just tilted her head in concern. Honestly, he wouldn't be surprised if she had some intelligence quirk or something. He just chuckled and patted her head before hopping out of bed to go take a shower and make some food. Honestly, Izuku knew he hadn't been all there for a while now. First, Eraserhead had brought back some unpleasant memories, but after stopping the bullies at Hitoshi's school, the environment was one he had been familiar with until he had run away and began online schooling when he was almost back then. He had just cried or given into the beatings. It wasn't like anyone cared. Not his mom or the teachers or even the police listened to him. He hadn't even seen Katsuki since he left. His former bully and even more former best friend. Izuku had thought about seeing how the blonde and his family were doing since the incident, but he hadn't cared enough to even try to see them. All he knew that his mother wasn't found for over a week and that they had believed his faked letter. Sure, he was happy that it had worked and Midoriya Izuku was no longer in Japan or even known how to contact, but he still felt disgusted with himself. It had taken time to come to terms with what he did and how he acted, but he had pushed the memories down and had been happy recently. He still was, but this recent nightmare was just one of many, the worst yet. Despite all his protective instincts telling him to shove the memories away again, Izuku knew he needed to face them. So for the first time since the incident, he let himself remember a bit more. After he had eaten a sandwich and fed sushi, he sat down on the couch and closed his eyes with a sigh. He just needed to think about it right. Let the memories come forth a bit, not all of them but maybe just, for some reason, Izuku began to think of 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫. Not Katsuki the bully, but 𝐀𝐮, the one who used to say they would become heroes together. His best friend. The one he used to look up to more than he had All Might back then. He had expected memories of that night from his nightmare or even the months after, but this was different. This was bittersweet. All he could do was smile and let the tears fall. He missed 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫. Despite everything that happened, all the pain Izuku felt emotionally, mentally, and physically from the boy, he missed him. If only he had a quirk, they could have been heroes together just like they always dreamed. If only they could have stayed friends, then maybe Izuku wouldn't be alone with no one but his cat to call family. Maybe the 𝐒𝐮𝐽𝐽𝑔𝐽s would have taken him in. Auntie was always nice to Izuku even when his mom wasn't. Perhaps his mother would have loved him in the first place. Maybe. Izuku shook his head. What did it matter anymore? He could never see the 𝐒𝐮𝐽𝑽𝑔𝐽s again. They might turn him in or at least reveal his identity if they met. Of course, his hair was now black and bit longer and his face had changed over the years, but he couldn't be too careful. Sushi's paw batted at his nose, and he was brought out of his thoughts. The cat sat patiently on his lap, watching him with round eyes. Izuku smiled at his fluff ball and began to scratch her head. Soon, she was purring and snuggling into his lap. Life may not have been what he expected, but in the end, he was fine with it. Things may have been shitty for him in the past, but he was doing better now. He had a few people he cared about and he could do what had been dreaming of for years, just not exactly in the way he was expecting. He mentally patched up the walls to his memories. He couldn't deal with them all at once. For now, he was relieved after thinking about Katsuki for the first time in earnest since he left. Maybe the unpleasant incident had changed the angry Pomeranian. Maybe he had become less aggressive or more focused on actually being a hero in the full sense. 𝐻𝐻𝐵e he was no longer in but. Izuku chuckled and shook his head. Wouldn't that be something? Izuku splashed cold water on his face before looking in his mirror. His eye bags were darker than they were a few weeks ago and his brow was more furrowed, as if constantly stressed. Not to mention his pale skin dotted with freckles seemed to somehow become more pale over the last few days or restless nights. Nightmares had prevented Izuku from getting more than a few hours when he did sleep. Sure, he was used to sleeping only 4 to 5 times a week on average, but he always got more than 5 hours. These days, he was lucky to get 3 in one sitting, with worse nights ending up with only a few minutes. Apparently, he was being obvious in the way that something was wrong. Hitoshi had asked him if he was alright and was constantly sending him concerned glancing during training. Eraserhead had been worse. He had already asked Rabbit if something was troubling him when he had stumbled or slipped up more than once. To make it worse, Eraserhead had asked Izuku the barista if he was doing alright when he came in a few mornings later. Izuku knew it was too much of a coincidence that both Izuku and Rabbit weren't themselves after years with the hero on both sides. So here Izuku was, staring himself down in the mirror as he attempted to force himself to get his life together. You are going to stop being a beach and pull yourself together, he threatened his reflection. Sushi meowed from his feet and Izuku turned to look down at her while she just tilted her head. He could almost hear her telling him about time. With a chuckle he shook his head. I know. I need to figure out what to do now. With a satisfied chirp, the monotone-colored cat walked away out of the bathroom and Izuku could hear her drinking some water in the other room. He needed to just do and not think right now. There was plenty of thinking time these past weeks. Having his new resolve, he sat down at his desk and opened his computer. First things first, he needed to help Hitoshi. Even if he accidentally slipped up with how personal the case was to him, he could probably bluff that he was in a very similar spot or even give the half-truth that he was thinking about his own past while he investigated. Either way was fine, but he needed to help his friend. With that declaration to himself, he began to gather evidence. His flybot was able to record some things, and he had even managed to get a few statements from neighbors who luckily weren't dumb and mentioned hearing yelling and how the poor boy always came home looking scared while leaving with a sigh of relief. The information was compiled, but Izuku still needed to send it to the hero and detective. Instead, he stalled for a bit by busying himself with other work in order to make up for his last few nights of shorter, clumsy patrols. He glanced at his clock and saw it was past time for him to head out as Rabbit and decided he should at least try. After his work on Hitoshi's and other cases, he was feeling lighter, so going out tonight shouldn't hurt. Izuku dressed quickly before petting a sleepy Sushi goodbye. She purred in response and watched him leave. Alright, I suppose I should go check on Hitoshi real quick. He is probably fine and sleeping, but I might as well. Hitoshi would probably be fine and hopefully asleep. Izuku knew he was just being paranoid. Even so, he ended up across from the house, hidden in the shadows. He quickly began to doubt himself. He didn't need to come here, Hitoshi was most likely fine. But soon, those doubts vanished when he heard shouting and watched in anger and slight horror as Hitoshi was shoved outside the house, door slamming in his face. It took Izuku great effort not to charge in right now, but thank goodness he was paranoid and decided to record from another flybot when he arrived in the neighborhood. Everything was on camera, and it would be some solid proof. Good parents aren't supposed to kick their kids out of the house at midnight. It would be awkward to try and talk to his friend as Rabbit, so instead, Izuku opted to follow the purple-haired teen to keep him safe. Then he could turn the file over to the detective, and his story about following a kid after watching him get kicked out would be 100% true and not suspicious. I'll get you out of there soon, Hitoshi sighed as he walked down the deserted sidewalk with only the dim streetlights to guide him. Today was a shitty day. His bullies had backed off after Izuku threatened them, but today they had figured out that physical beatings weren't the only way to bring him down. When he had arrived to school and entered the classroom, his desk had a red spider lily laid across it and a note telling him to just give up and stop trying to be a hero among other distasteful things. What he hadn't expected was how his mind immediately thought of Izuku. A vivid memory of how the black-haired teen brushed off his bullies after venting a bit with Hitoshi about them. He had even laughed and mentioned that the red flower of death was actually pretty once you look past its universal meaning. Even so, the gesture itself was like a jab to the gut. After that, Hitoshi had been left alone when a group project was announced and now had to do it by himself. Even if it meant that asking Izuku for help was easier alone, it still made his skin prickle in resentment. The cherry on top of this day was his parents. Apparently, they had a family friend over and offered to let them stay the night. As usual, Hitoshi was just staying up in his room the whole time, missing dinner. But hunger got the best of him eventually, and he foolishly tried to sneak into the kitchen for a sandwich. He got caught despite it being midnight. His parents were still awake and talking quietly with their friends when he had accidentally slid his plate a bit, making a small noise. That is how he found himself here. Freezing and hungry out past midnight with nowhere to go. While it wasn't his first night kicked out of a house, it was the first one in a while and he felt small. Especially after how his day had been going so far. Before he even realized where he was going, he ended up at a parkour route that he often took. Izuku had found it for him near his house in case Hitoshi ever wanted to practice close by. The only issue now was that it was night. Izuku had told him multiple times to not go on any routes at night. For one, it was dark and harder to see his own footing, and most importantly, two, criminals could be nearby at night. Despite this, Hitoshi thought it couldn't hurt. This route had a few lights around it and was relatively easy compared to some others, so he wouldn't get too hurt even if he did fall. And if criminals showed up, well, he could probably escape. He had been training and was used to running away from people thanks to his bullies. I'll be fine, he told himself before he sprinted up to the concrete wall that marked the start of the route. After scaling the 6-foot wall, Hitoshi quickly flipped off it and landed on the dumpster below. His abilities were far greater than he had actually anticipated them to be by now. After nearly a year of training with Izuku, Hitoshi felt as if he had been doing it far longer. After all, here he was jumping and scaling different walls, fire escapes, and rooftops among anything else he could use. Yup, he thought to himself as he landed safely from his dive roll of another ledge, completely normal skills for a 14-year-old. Hitoshi was nearing the end of his route and pushed away the twinge of disappointment. When running, jumping, flipping, and climbing on parkour routes, his mind was calm, clear. He could only focus and think in the moment of his moves and what came next, leaving no room for anything else. Unfortunately, he was a bit too lost in the moment and only barely sensed the punch headed his way. He knew he couldn't dodge because it was a bit too late, but he did manage to bring up his arms and block the hit. With a grunt, he felt himself skid backwards from the force, his back hitting the brick wall. "Never get corned," Izuku's matter-of-fact voice echoed. "Don't let them surround you and find a way out." Well, Hitoshi felt pretty dumb now as the three men approached him, smirking. Izuku had taught him so much about fighting and being aware of his surroundings, but the one night he does something risky, he forgets almost all of it. And then, without warning, his hero appeared. Hitoshi blinked in shock as a small figure appeared from seemingly nowhere and knocked out the largest of the three men with one swift movement. The other two men stared for only a moment before they cursed and rushed for Hitoshi, hoping to use him as a hostage. Unfortunately for them, Rabbit was faster and rushed forward, knocking them both out in the process before turning towards Hitoshi. He knew he must look pretty dumb right now, with his eyes wide open and mouth hung in disbelief. But he couldn't help it, the Rabbit had just saved him. The Vigilante who Hitoshi had secretly admired ever since a video of one of his fights had been uploaded even though it and any others got taken down shortly after. Rabbit silently walked up to him and waved a hand in front of his face. Hitoshi realized he must have been staring and quickly looked away, blushing slightly in embarrassment. "Thank you." Hitoshi stumbled over his words, glancing between Rabbit and the criminals he had just taken down. The Vigilante just chucked at him before reaching out a hand to help him up, which he gladly took. "No problem," Rabbit's electronic voice replied before having a slightly sharper tone. "But what exactly were you doing out so late?" Izuku had been silently cursing when he watched Hitoshi go on the parkour route, but he didn't stop him. The exercise was good for him, Izuku knew. But then he noticed how his friend seemed to forget all his warnings about danger and being aware. And Izuku's uneasy feeling was proven right when three men saw him. Thankfully, Hitoshi was able to block the punch thrown at him, but now he was cornered and Izuku began to curse once more to himself as he rushed in to help his friend. The fight was easier than his trainings with Hitoshi, he didn't even break a sweat, but at the moment he was more focused on the boy. No, he couldn't just start lecturing him. He was Rabbit right now, not Izuku. One slip-up could reveal himself, especially since he wanted to chew him out about how he didn't even notice the men in the first place. So instead, he inwardly sighed and just pretended to be none the wiser to the fact that Hitoshi had the skills to defend himself. Right now he was just any other kid. "Thank you." Izuku chucked at his friend and held out an arm to help him up. "No problem." Izuku tried to keep his voice level, but his next words were a bit too accusatory. "But what exactly were you doing out so late?" The taller boy looked down and began to fumble with his shirt's hem, eyes darting around as if searching for an excuse on the ground. "I needed some air, sleepless night." Izuku knew that Hitoshi wasn't exactly in his best shape right now after being kicked out, but come on. The boy was usually a damn good liar even if Izuku could still see though it, and the best he can come up with is needing fresh air. At 1 a.m. Knowing he didn't have time to pry right now, Izuku just nodded and told him to call the police while he restrained the criminals. Now there was a problem. Hitoshi couldn't go home right now. In fact, Izuku refused to let him go home after today. If he hadn't listened to his paranoia and didn't check in on Hitoshi, well, the boy might have been found dead in this alley. Even his friend wasn't yet ready to fight 3 opponents twice his size with decently dangerous quirks. Izuku just sighed and turned back to his friend. He wasn't entirely sure what he was doing yet, but he needed Hitoshi to talk and couldn't let the police take him home. He would be in trouble. And that meant he would be hurt in some way or another. "Could we talk for a moment?" Hitoshi's eyes looked up at him in shock and confusion, body ridged. After a moment he slouched, looking away and nodded. Sure. With that, Izuku led the boy to a nearby rooftop, just far enough away from the scene to not be found. And now it was silent. Izuku usually was great at talking with others in this situation as Rabbit. He calmed down tons of victims ranging from, just got mugged for the first time, to, a runaway kid without a home. People just seemed to like talking with him about anything. But Hitoshi. It was personal and Izuku couldn't reveal himself, but here goes nothing. So, Izuku began, "Do you know who I am?" Hitoshi just snorted softly, "Yeah, that vigilante, Rabbit." While Izuku nodded, Hitoshi continued. "And a barista at a coffee shop as well as my first real friend." He froze. Wait, what did he just dash? Hitoshi was looking up at the sky and all Izuku could do is stare at him wide-eyed in disbelief. Well, wait, what? Hitoshi turned to look at him, lips drawn in a small smirk. "Izuku, you SCK at secrets." When he didn't respond, the purple-haired boy continued, "I only recently realized it was probably you, and I was still skeptical until tonight. I mean, who would suspect the coffee boy in a small cafe, right? But too many things lined up. Why you are so good at fighting for your age, your shift hours at the cafe, and especially the fact that you make great support gear and can hack and code anything. No middle schooler should probably know all of that." He glanced down. "Plus, you are literally wearing the same utility belt you showed me a week ago." Izuku shook his head in disbelief, at both Hitoshi and at himself. "Wow, I guess I really let my guard down around you." He laughed sheepishly before whispering to himself, "I knew I shouldn't have shown you my support gear." Hitoshi giggled, a glint in his eyes. "Well, I admit that was kind of careless, but I'm glad you did. Also don't worry, I would never rat you out. I like my vigilante friends outside of jail, thank you very much." At that, Izuku just snorted and shook his head. "And I prefer my civilian friends not getting jumped in an alley after midnight." The other boy rolled his eyes before casting them down. As much as Izuku would like to just sit here and chat as friends, he still needed to help Hitoshi and talk with him. "Listen, Toshi. I don't want you to freak out," and now his friend was clearly trying not panic and failing great, "but I know that your foster home isn't safe and dash." Izuku paused to looking into Hitoshi's eyes. "I want to help you." Just like that, the floodgates released and Hitoshi began to tell Izuku everything, including how his parents had died before he was put into the system. Even if he already knew from his spy fly about his friend's foster family, it was nice to hear it from him himself. And he knew that Hitoshi also felt better being able to talk to someone. By the time he was finished and Izuku had calmed him down and comforted him, the police were at the scene. And he knew that a certain hero would be too. As if on cue, the hobo hero landed behind the two boys with a purposefully audible thump. Hitoshi jumped while Izuku just turned to face the man. Eraserhead was walking towards them now, his uninterested and bored mask falling slightly when he saw Hitoshi's tear-stained face. "What happened?" Izuku gestured towards the nearby scene before looking back to Hitoshi, who was now gawking at his favorite hero, stars in his usually lifeless eyes. Izuku bit back his laugh. "Well, this kid was attacked and I saved him." Eraser just grunted in response and Izuku quickly began to form a plan. The hero had a soft spot for kids and his husband, Mike, had been wanting a kid for a while now. Don't ask how he knows this. If a young child was in too much danger and an older civilian child was as well, then what about a hero kid who could already defend himself? It was only logical. Now just to make him take the bait. "Could you walk him home, Eraser? I can't exactly show myself." The hero sighed and began to ask Hitoshi some questions like his address and why he was out. His lie was better this time, but still weak. Probably because he was facing his idol. "Hey Shinso," Izuku called out to his friend, careful to use his family name. And not his nickname. "Could you wait there for a moment? Just have to brief Eraserhead here on the criminals." After he agreed, Izuku turned to the hero, face and tone shifting in seriousness. Eraser noticed his change in demeanor and narrowed his eyes. "What is it?" Izuku sighed before hissing out, "I need you to get that kid out of his home. I talked with him. His foster parents are definitely abusive in more than one way, even if he was vague about it. His quirk is considered villainous, and I honestly don't want to let him go back that house ever again. I'll gather more information tonight just in case. Eraser blinked in slight surprise at his tone before sighing and nodding. I'll try to get him out tomorrow. Do you think he would come home with me for now? He tried not to laugh. Would Hitoshi be willing to go home with his idol? Of course he would. But Izuku wasn't finished. He wanted this hero to adopt his friend, and what better way than to be blunt and rational? It was the hero's own language. Yes, I think he would. But I also have a request. Eraser eyed him and sighed. What is it? Would you be willing to adopt him yourself? The hero looked at him in shock before narrowing his eyes. Before he could speak, Izuku held up a hand and explained. Listen, don't ask how, but I know your husband, President Mike, has been wanting a kid. Any regular kid won't do because it would be dangerous to be the child of two pro-heroes. But Shinso here, he gestured to where his friend stood nervously waiting. He said he wants to go to UA and be a hero, not to mention he does have some skills from what I can tell. He won't be in any particular danger if he will become a hero himself soon anyways. Izuku studied the hero and noticed how his face seemed to soften in understanding. It is logical. Just think about it. For now, I just want that foster parents of his in jail. He muttered bitterly. A hand patted his head and Izuku looked up in surprise. The hero smiled and gave him another pat before walking off. I'll make sure they get what's coming to them. Now Izuku couldn't help but smile as he watched the hero and his friend walk away. I'm sure you will, Aizawa. Eraserhead thankfully kept up with Izuku, rabbit about Shinso's case and how his friend was doing even if Hitoshi was texting him about it himself. Apparently Mike had been more than happy to take him in and also lent a hand to the case. It wasn't even 12 hours later that he had received a message from Eraser that they were making a move. It also helped that Izuku had used his spy fly to get some evidence of the parents ranting to themselves about Hitoshi and how they were going to treat him when he got home that morning. Not very subtle about it either. At noon, Izuku asked to leave work early and watched from a nearby alley as Eraserhead arrested the two ex-foster parents. According to the text the hero sent, President Mike had wanted to come as well, but ended up staying home with Hitoshi. It was a good call, based on how Mike had furiously helped with the case as soon as he heard it. The man was angry and as much as they all wanted to, they could not punch the people. Aizawa probably wanted to as well, but he has a bit more control over his anger. The two of them were missing from the coffee shop for 4 days. Sure, it made Izuku a bit sad and dare he say lonely, but Hitoshi was finally getting help and that's all that mattered. The trial was held, and Hitoshi had to get settled into his new home with the heroes after they signed the papers, and he was officially a part of their family. Finally, they came back to the coffee shop, this time together with Yamada as well. As a family. While the two adults were lagging behind, arguing about something, Hitoshi walked up and waved. Hey Izuku, Izuku smiled brightly. Hi Toshi. Good to see you again. Suddenly, the hero's conversation stopped and Aizawa raised an eyebrow, eyes glancing between the two in mild curiosity. You two know each other? He nodded happily. Yup. Have for some time now. It's good to see you again Aizawa, and I presume this is your husband, Yamada? Nice to meet you sir, I am Megumi Izuku. Nice to meet you too little listener. Sho here has been gushing about your coffee for years now. Aizawa glared at him accusingly before turning back to Izuku. I'll just take my regular. Me too, Hitoshi piped up. After typing in their orders that he knew by heart and because they were so simple, Izuku turned to Yamada who was looking over the menu. I'll just have some black tea and slice of pumpkin bread. Izuku finished up their order/payment and went to make the drinks while the family sat down at the Aizawa's usual table. As he walked out with their drinks and pastries on a tray, he spotted Yui talking with the family. Those dirty little, Yui, it's fine. They're gone now. I know, but if I ever see them, I will not hesitate to teach them a thing or two. Don't worry, those two won't be out of there for a long time, me and Zashi made sure of it. Izuku walked up and smiled. Don't get too upset Yui, from what I've heard, they got what they deserved. He began to hand out the drinks and pastries while Yui was now off slightly behind him and pouting. I still wish I could have seen their faces. At that, she waved goodbye and quietly told Izuku to take a break soon. He knew she was trying to get him to sit with the hero family, but he couldn't just crash it. Sure, it was fine with just Hitoshi or Aizawa, but they were here as a family. A family Izuku wasn't a part of. He attempted to turn around and get back to work, but, surprisingly, Yamada was the one to stop him. So little listener, how do you know Hitoshi here? I can tell Sho is dying to know as well. He glanced towards his husband mischievously while Aizawa just glared back half-heartedly. Izuku rubbed his neck. Well, he came in for a while and after I helped him with something, we got to know each other. It's been a while since then. Even though he was trying to be cryptic and not give much aways, apparently Hitoshi wasn't. Instead, he elbowed Izuku with a scoff and turned back to his dad's. Basically, he helped me chase off some bullies and was the one who helped me train after being the first person to tell me that I could be a hero. Hitoshi stated bluntly and smirked while Izuku just mentally face-palmed, his face heating up slightly from embarrassment. He hadn't wanted the heroes to find out about all that, but he knew Hitoshi wouldn't let it go. Izuku didn't need to go to UA, but Hitoshi had other ideas and was definitely pushing them right now. When they were talking about getting Hitoshi into UA on one day of training, the boy had asked Izuku if he was going to the school as well. Of course, Izuku said he wasn't interested, but Hitoshi hadn't stopped pestering him about it. And now that his friend knows he is a vigilante, well, he was more determined than ever to make Izuku legal, even though he technically couldn't be charged for vigilantism since he didn't have a quirk to even use. Either way, getting the eyes of two pro-heroes who teach there meant that he might not have a choice anymore if they specifically asked him about it one day. Why would a teenager need to be as strong as a mid-level pro-hero in combat if not for heroics? Worst-case scenario, they would assume him a villain. It was really nothing Hitoshi. Bullies are stupid and I didn't like them, that's all. He could tell the heroes wanted to ask him more, but thankfully. Another customer came in and Izuku was able to excuse himself from their conversation. While he worked, he kept glancing back the family. They were now relaxed and arguing about how Aizawa apparently can't cook to save his life. Last night's dinner seemingly was proof enough. Izuku hadn't realized it at first, but he felt it now. His chest was clenched and throbbing, waves of something bittersweet flooding him when he heard them laugh or poke fun at each other good-naturally. It was familiar and yet unwelcome, this sense of yearning he felt. Small claws pierced through his breathes at his shin and Izuku looked down at Sushi who had just woken up from her nap under the counter. She must have sensed that he was upset. Izuku crouched down and let her perch on his shoulders now as he cleaned another table. The pain in his chest was numbing and he reached up to scratch at his cat's head. "Thank you, girl," Sushi chirped and began to purr. It was comforting and Izuku was somehow able to keep his emotions in check for the next half hour. He was pretty sure Aizawa hadn't noticed his weird mood and avoidance of them. Maybe. When the family had left, Izuku just waved them goodbye, but Hitoshi paused at the door before turning around. Without a word, the taller boy hugged Izuku and then whispered quietly, "Thank you." Izuku patted his back after a moment while trying to hold back his shock at the sudden affection. When they pulled apart, Hitoshi was smiling softly and Izuku could only return it along with a small nod. He may or may not have watched, with a tight pain in his chest, as the family of three began to walk down the street together and out of sight. That afternoon, Izuku laid in his bed, listening peacefully to the crickets and cicadas outside his cabin. He began to space out and wonder out loud, a family, huh? What would it be like? Similar to earlier that day, a fluffy white paw batted at his nose, no claws this time, bringing him out of his daze. He met the small fluffball's intelligent eyes which simply blinked at him in concern. With a gentle smile, he rubbed her head. "I guess we have to be each other's family." She simply began to purr in response, giving his cheek a small lick before snuggling into his chest more. He smiled wider before letting himself relax and drift off into a comfortable sleep. A month later, everything was going great. Hitoshi and Aizawa continued to visit the café. Aizawa came in the mornings and Hitoshi would sometimes come with his two dads if not alone on weekends. Izuku was happy that his first and dear friend was looking a lot better. Sure, he still had eye bags and barely got sleep, insomniac and all, but he definitely is getting more restful sleep at least as well as being able to eat healthier than before. It was an average Saturday, Nothing of note happening until Hitoshi and his two pro-hero dads walked in. Izuku was happy when all three of them came together, even if his chest tightened ever so slightly at the sight of the happy family. He pushed away the feeling as he always did and convinced himself it was just nerves from having two pro-heroes in the same room alongside the one person who knew Izuku's secret. It was definitely not his stupid emotions. They ordered their usuals and sat at their table, talking about something Izuku was strongly avoiding due to that dear friend of his. The UA entrance exam. Unfortunately for him, he had a job to do. His only hope was that they let him get back to work without dragging him into their conversation. I was just saying, it wouldn't have hurt to let him try the recommendation exam. Zashi, he doesn't need the recommendation exams, and didn't he tell you he didn't want special treatment? Aizawa rolled his eyes fondly. Hitoshi chuckled gently, "Pa, seriously, it's fine. I didn't want people to think I got in just cause my dads are teachers." Izuku smiled, surprisingly genuine, as he walked up to the family and began handing out their mugs and plates. They each gave him a soft thanks. Expect Yamada, he was the louder of the three. Just as he was placing down the last dish, a tired voice made him freeze. "So, problem child, you applying to UA?" Izuku was cursed, he decided. He had been praying for Hitoshi not to rope him into this conversation, but evidently he should have prayed for all three of them to leave him alone. Instead of sighing like he really wanted to, Izuku gave his usual smile. "I wasn't planning to. Besides, I can't pass the exam." The hero narrowed his eyes, hopefully not in suspicion. "I haven't seen much of your skills, but from what I've had Izuku mentally cursed Hitoshi, knowing this was all a part of his plan. "You're skilled and could make a great hero." "Yeah, little listener. Sho here wouldn't ask for more students unless he really thought you have potential." Yamada added. "Why do you say you wouldn't pass?" Izuku had managed to keep his quirkless status a secret from Aizawa, and clearly, Hitoshi hadn't and wouldn't share the fact either. It was a touchy subject. While he knew these two heroes weren't like others, not many people were accepting of his lack of a quirk. Even a certain number one rejected him for it. Izuku shook himself and steeled his nerves. "I'm quirkless." Every atom in his body was buzzing. Hitoshi didn't hate him, and the heroes didn't seem like the type, but then again neither had the golden idiot. Izuku, hearing his name, he snapped back into reality. Slowly, he studied the three people in front of him. Hitoshi had called his name and was looking at him with worry. Despite how much his friend wanted to get him into UA, he still understood that this was difficult for Izuku. Carefully, he glanced over the two adults and they weren't looking at him with pity or disgust or hatred. Nothing negative. Rather, they simply looked shocked and impressed. That couldn't be right. Aizawa sighed, his face almost blank, albeit a small furrow to his brow for an unreadable reason. "I still stand by what I said, problem child." Izuku could only blink in relief and a bit of shock. "We technically cannot disclose any information on the exam to either of you." Yama shot a glance between Hitoshi and Izuku, but Hitoshi's quirk won't do much in the practical, meaning he will fight without his quirk for the most part. "If we believe he can get in, then you certainly can." Hitoshi smirked and leaned forward. "Not to mention, I still can't beat Zuku, so he would definitely pass." Izuku was cornered and he had to pull his trump card. Not that it was anything special. Just another thing he was keeping hidden from anyone he could. Keeping his information secret was a defense mechanism. Sue him. "As much as I appreciate it, I have already completed high school curriculum." He kept a small, somewhat strained smile on his face. "That's why I am working here. I finished my last year a few months ago and wanted a job." It was more like he needed the job, but they didn't need to know that. As far as anyone was concerned, he lived with his dad, who was almost always in America for business. And even that lie was one more thing he would keep under wraps for as long as possible. The heroes were definitely surprised. Even Aizawa's eyebrows twitch up at the information. "You could still apply in order to get a hero license," Hitoshi argued. "Plus that just means the other classes would be easy or omitted from your schedule." Aizawa sighed once more and gulped down the last of his coffee that he has been sipping on throughout the conversation. "Honestly, kid, I think that just makes you more qualified. Nizu would be thrilled to have you." The hero shuddered at the thought of his boss. They wouldn't give up. Izuku knew this from the start, but he had some hope. I'll think about. Now, if you'll excuse me, he gave them a bow and small smile before walking away to get back to work. The family kept glancing in his direction until they left, and Yamada patted his hair while they were leaving. Izuku would never admit how much that made his chest tighten, nor how much he wished the hero would do it again. A day before applications close, Izuku sat at his computer, mouse hovering over the submit button. It really wasn't a good idea. 𝐻𝐻𝐸 did extensive background checks, and it isn't like he needed to go to high school anyways. He was already taking some free online college courses for fun. After lots of thinking, he had decided to write himself an application for the support course. The Yamazawa family, as he fondly called them much to Aizawa's exasperation, were definitely expecting him in the hero course. But there was an issue. Izuku couldn't show off his real fighting skills. Thanks to his information gathering, hacking into 𝐻𝐻𝐸, he knew the hero entrance exam practical was fighting robots. Of course, he could easily get in by defeating them, but he wasn't ready to show his whole hand just yet. Aizawa had seen some of his fighting skills, but if he saw him in the practical, he might start making connections or conclusions. He didn't mean to brag, but Izuku was skilled. He was trained. And that would make him stand out, especially to a certain underground hero who he patrolled with every other night. A hero license would be nice so he wouldn't have to run from the heroes or police, but he could transfer during the sports festival if he ended up wanting to risk it. So, in the end, he had made his application for the support course. It was something he actually wanted to do anyways. He could become better at making support gear as well as get his hands on some nice materials that didn't come from old electronics and trashed machinery. He would just have to be careful when making things for Rabbit. He did not need another person finding him out because he was careless about who saw his gear. Before he could come to a full decision, the computer screen suddenly changed, showing two bold words, SBMs and complete. Izuku glanced over to see Sushi with one paw on his mouse, pressing down the button. After a moment of silence, he shook his head. You did that on purpose. She simply mewed in response before jumping on his shoulders, purring. At this point he was 100% sure that Sushi had some kind of quirk and could understand humans. She responded to questions and at some point, she started to help him build gear. It took a while, but she learned what certain parts were and would fetch things for him as well as bring him back on task if he got distracted. Thanks to that, he was surprisingly more productive. Patting her head, he chuckled, "Maybe I should try to get permission for you to join me." She chirped and rubbed against his cheek while he walked them to his bed. For all his worry about getting found out, he couldn't deny the small bubble of excitement in his chest. 𝐻𝐻𝐸 had been his dream school before everything. Before his childhood crashed down around him. 𝐻𝐻𝐸. Guess my dream isn't so dead after all. Sorry kid, it's not going to happen. After the doctor had proclaimed him as quirkless, Izuku had been in shock all the way home. Izuku went home with his mom who barely looked at him, but when she did, she would flash a forced reassuring smile filled with pity and sadness. Hisashi had come to greet them only to drop his smile and ask what had happened. Inko had been unable to reply and Izuku finally began to cry before managing to whisper out that he was quirkless. Hisashi looked at Inko who just began to cry, looking down and away. Izuku watched his father walk towards him in a silent rage before slapping him to the ground and saying that he was no son of mine. Hisashi was rarely home for a week before he started to pack his things one day and left saying he was headed to America and cutting all ties. Inko had holed up in her room after Hisashi left, crying. Eventually, she started working again, picking up as many shifts at the hospital that she could to try and pay for her and her son. Despite his father's sudden absence and his mother's distance, Izuku held on to hope. He finally went to play with 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 again after getting a small nod in approval from his mother. Surely his best friend, his brother, would be there for him. Alas, 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨 looked at him with an unreadable emotion and told him that he couldn't become a hero anymore and that they weren't friends because Izuku had broken their promise. Izuku pleaded. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨 had told him that he would protect Izuku when they became the top heroes together and that he could still help. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨 scoffed and told him a worthless Deku could never help anyone, much less be a hero. All Izuku could do was watch as his former friend stormed away from him in anger while a dull pain throbbed in his shaking chest. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 started to get physical with his bullying when they were 5 since teachers didn't care so long as no one had to go to the hospital or died. Even 𝗏𝐻𝐭 didn't care and brushed it off as boys being boys. Fortunately, Izuku started online schooling when he was 8, but he still sometimes ran into 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 and his friends when he left the house. In spite of everything, Izuku didn't listen to anyone and began to study anything and everything he could. Coding, hacking, mechanics, and analytics were his favorite subjects as he rushed through his online classes. When Izuku was 9, he got attacked by a sludge villain and was saved by All Might. He asked him if he could be a hero, and All Might turned him down without a second thought before leaving Izuku alone on the street, not even bothering to check him for injuries. At first he was depressed while heading home, but after rushing forward and saving 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 from the same villain later, he realized that All Might had been wrong. He just saved someone when the heroes couldn't, and he was literally a tiny child with a pen. They scolded him, but he didn't listen to them. He just sent them a glare and calmly asked them what they were doing by sitting there. So what if their quirks weren't suited for the situation? Were they going to give the same excuse to his parents at the kid's funeral? Izuku walked away from the shocked crowd, more determined than ever. He would become a hero, no matter what. Even if the world denied him, he would save people. Izuku couldn't relax for the life of him. The UA entrance exam was now only 2 days away and he was getting nervous. There was really no reason why. He simply wasn't mentally prepared to be back at school again. Sure, the principal of UA, 𝐬𝗏𝗡 himself, constantly proclaimed and enforced a no-quirk discrimination policy, but Izuku didn't even have a quirk, so he wasn't sure if it fell under that category. After all, every school had the policy, and yet none of them helped him in the past. Even his online classes were difficult, groups projects were done by himself, and he would receive messages from other students from time to time. Some told him the usual insults, others told him to just die already. So nothing new. But it still hurt, and he was not looking forward to people finding out he didn't have a quirk. Nizu was the type of person to look at skill rather than quirk, so Izuku knew the rat wouldn't deny him immediately, but he couldn't stop the thoughts of what ifs. Would his classmates turn on him? Would his teachers give him the same treatment as others? Would he have to find a hiding place at lunch? How would he have to survive? Worst of all, he completely forgot that 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 would be attending, no doubt. With his quirk, he would easily get into class 1A, and the thought made Izuku 100 times happier that he hadn't tried for heroics. His fake name and hair color would hide him well enough, and they hadn't even seen each other for over 5 years, but he still didn't want to face the Pomeranian again. Despite his own reassurances, he couldn't really shake his worries. School has always been a place of hell for him, and despite everything, UA was still a school. He could only hope it was not as bad as his others used to be. On top of that, the support course exam material had made him both excited and nervous. It was split into technically 3 sections of testing. The first part was a simply academic test that every student needed to take regardless of course. The second phase was not so much a test as it was a demonstration. Each student needed to bring 2 to 3 blueprints for some kind of support gear and explain them. Izuku knew that they weren't looking for too much, just if the student had basic understandings of the course material. Of course, Izuku was tempted to be the overachiever that he usually was by creating all of his blueprints beforehand to bring in, but he managed to restrain himself to only creating one of them for showcasing. Normal students wouldn't do this, but Izuku already had an excuse ready for his skills. Which brings him to the last test, the most fun and troublesome of all. The students were to either pick a blueprint from a given list or submit their own for approval in advance that they would be making in the span of 2 hours. Izuku probably should have chosen one from the list, but after asking Sushi what he should do, she had stubbornly insisted on his own blueprints. Now the prospect of creating his own blueprint that he could make with top-quality materials from UA was like a dream come true, but he knew that he was better than most all of the first-year students currently at UA. He definitely didn't hack into their security cameras to check or anything. His excuse for now was that he started tinkering as a young child and it evolved. Not entirely true, but close enough. And hopefully convincing enough. Even knowing this, Sushi had convinced him to give in to his excitement, so he had drawn up an actual blueprint for a voice modifier that he had already been creating small sketches of for a while, wanting to make it for Hitoshi one day. But now, even though it was meant for his exam, he couldn't wait any longer and decided he could come up with something else for the exam. The next time he saw Hitoshi, he had practically begged the taller boy to let him make the item right now, insisting on finishing it for Hitoshi to use in the practical exam, but the boy had refused and instead resolutely told Izuku make it for his own exam. They argued over it for a bit, Izuku insisting he could draw up another blueprint for his exam, until Hitoshi finally won. He had already got a boa staff approved for the practical and couldn't take anything else, so Izuku begrudgingly backed down. Hitoshi hadn't been too happy about Izuku's choice to go into the support course, but after explaining his reasons, the taller boy had to accept it. After all, he couldn't argue when it came to the topic of Izuku's vigilante identity. So instead, he was trying to help Izuku do as well as he could so that he would join him in heroics one day. Izuku was already a hero, now Hitoshi just had to make sure he became a legal one,